should women be drafted? This is an effort to figure out if you guys are feminist or not. Should women be drafted in the military?
Like, by drafted, do you mean like when you turn 18, like you're automatically?
Okay, yeah. So men have to register for the selective service. Currently, there's not a draft in the United States, but all men in the United States at 18, in order to be able to vote and have other benefits, they have to register for the selective service, which would then make them subject to military conscription in the case that there was a military conflict which required a draft. So do you think women should be subject to selective service draft? Forced?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Okay.
I wouldn't even trust women to like fight for our country unless that's like that's their thing. You know, like if you're like that type of woman that you feel like you're stronger and stuff like that. But I just feel like no.
Okay. What do you think?
Well, hold on. So you think they should be drafted based on how they feel?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if like willingly, if you just want to.
She's saying if they want to
volunteer. No, just really want to volunteer. Yeah,
If they want to volunteer, yes.
Yeah, but then that just defeats the purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean.
Right. Well, that's what we currently have.
Yeah, but I guess we should be drafted because I mean.
Okay. All right.
I mean, plenty of men don't want to join.
Okay.
Plenty of men. Plenty of men. Plenty of women. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
If we gotta do what we gotta do, I mean, yeah.
Now here's the interesting thing. You guys both have different opinions on this. I still don't know which is actually like the actual feminist position, because we'll have feminists who will argue it's actually, we had one last week with Andrew, who said, well, it's not equitable. It's not equity for women to be drafted. That's a whole nother thing.
Interesting.
But what about you?
No.
No? Okay.
No, women should not be drafted.
Should not be drafted?
No.
But they should be paid equally in sporting events?
No comment.
Okay.
No.
They shouldn't be drafted?
I don't think so.
Well, hold on.
Okay, so everybody except Anza said women shouldn't be drafted, but y'all want to be equal? So wait a sec. How are you equal if the men are the ones that have to fight and die to defend the country? The men are the ones that build and maintain all the infrastructure, right? Like none of this stuff in the studio is built or maintained by women. Do you know that like 90% of infrastructure jobs are still held by men? And that if you look at the top 20 jobs held by women now in 2024 versus 1924 are almost the exact same. So women have had 100 years to do whatever they want, and they still do the same 20 jobs they did 100 years ago, other than we switched out farm labor for HR work. But other than that, we're secretaries, nurses, daycare ladies, early childhood education, administrative assistants, retail workers, all the same shit that we were a century ago. So if the men are the ones tasked with every time there's a natural disaster, they have to go out and rescue people from the fires and the floodwaters, and every time there's a war, the men have to go and fight it and defend the country, and anytime there's a criminal who needs to be violently arrested, it's going to be a man who goes and does that, not a woman. Where does the equality come in? If we're doing the fluffy jobs, you know, we're all singers. We got a lot of singers and musicians, which is cool. It's great. I love music too. But y'all ain't like rescuing people and you know, doing the heavy lifting or the dirty or the dangerous jobs. Like who collects the trash? Men. You know, who does all the steel working and oil rig work and all of the like sewer cleaning? Men.
We have a video on this, Rachel, actually. Nick, remember that video we were looking at yesterday? I think it might still be on one of the tabs. Let's watch this.
Is it audio?
No audio. No audio. Go ahead.
Oh, there's no audio on it.
Yeah, go ahead. Are you ready to work on an oil rig? All right.
Come on, feminists, get in there. You
those
can
are
do
some
it.
roughnecks.
Come on, ladies. Anyone? Andrew had to do
that.
stuff like that back in the day. They'd lower him
underwater
into
welding, I guess.
Not underwater, but they would lower him into these tiny little horrifically frightening spaces to do extremely dangerous stuff.
I'm claustrophobic.
I really feel like women should just have the choice to do it if they want to, because I know some women that can handle it.
They do have the choice, and they're not.
They do, and they're not
doing it.
They don't
fine.
want to.
Well,
This is the big secret, right? Is that women don't want to do any of this dirty, dangerous, scary stuff. They don't want to.
Well, yeah, but is that just, you know, what we've been raised with, the culture we're surrounded by?
No, and I have data to back this up. So
okay.
If you...
Oh, is there more, Nick? Just let it play.
Yeah, we'll just let it play. So back around the time of suffrage, we're talking like 1850s to 1920, roughly around there when the big suffrage movement was happening. Did you guys know that most women were completely against it? By all of the referendums that they would do where they would let women vote on whether they wanted to vote, only about 4% actually had any interest in voting. And they actually had really good reasons for this. There was much higher membership in anti-suffrage groups than pro-suffrage groups. And these groups would do public debates. They would do written debates, newspaper periodicals where they would go back and forth and debate these things. And the women who were against suffrage said, look, the primary purpose of government is to protect persons and property, okay? Why task women with that when we're not really capable of doing that, okay? We don't want to have to be drafted. We don't want to have to do jury duty. We don't want to have to be a political bloc because back then women had advocacy groups for things they wanted, but they weren't a lobbying group. They didn't have like voting rights, so they weren't able to be as easily politicized. They felt like they had a moral high ground to ask for things like, we need more parks, we need better schools, we need clean air, whatever it was. And that if they became just another voting bloc, they would be involved in dirty politics, and they didn't want to do that. They felt like somebody has to be morally neutral and not involved in politics. So, given all of that, do you guys think that women can protect and defend persons and property?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, well, first of all, I want to go back to the fact that for a long time, women weren't allowed to own property, or at least not without being married. And so...
Actually, it was the opposite. It was once you got married, you generally, whatever belonged to you belonged to your husband.
Sure, but then usually the woman is still living with the family.
Right, but why would you... So think about why.
Why would you want to live on your own?
Why do you think women didn't own property?
Well,
do you think it was just the patriarchy, like just
No,
hated
I'm not
the
saying
women
that.
and
I'm
they
not
just
saying
wanted
that.
to put their boot on their neck and keep them down?
I
or-
generally don't think that.
Okay, what do you think?
I generally think it was just a matter of the times. Like, you know, because it was, I mean...
So do you think there was a reason, though? Do you think there was a logic behind not letting
I think it
women own
worked for
property?
back then. I think it worked for what it is at that point in time.
No, I don't think you understand what I'm
Sure.
saying. So
Okay.
if you're a woman
Yeah.
and you own land and it's 1802, and bandits or cattle robbers or Indians come and they say, we're taking your land,
Yeah.
what are you going to do about it?
But that's exactly my point. That worked for that time.
Okay, what's different now?
We don't have that as much. I mean, it depends on the neighborhood, of course. I mean, it depends on the community,
Okay,
et
so
cetera.
if you own land now in 2024 and you have a squatter who comes and squats on your property and you need them removed,
I did
do
that.
you call ladies to come and physically remove them, or are there men who come and physically remove them?
So I had a subleaser who I needed to get rid of, and I did all of it. My landlord didn't do anything.
Okay, what'd you do?
I went to the court, and
Okay.
I got the papers. I took her to court. I won.
Oh wait, as a woman squatter?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, okay, but did you physically remove her, or did cops come?
Well, did she willingly, after the judgment from the court, she willingly left?
So, okay, the lease was up. She refused to leave. And so, you know, I got the paperwork. I gave her the 3-day notice to vacate, which is the proper way to...
Right, you're going through the eviction process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, and she was still like, that's not right. It's totally illegal, even though I got it literally from the courthouse. And so then we're like, okay, let's get the proper eviction papers. Mind you, we still had the papers escorted by cops.
So did you both went to the court and there was like the eviction trial?
Yeah, and we did.
Okay.
Well, I mean, not the eviction trial.
So then-
So she did leave within the 5 days of receiving the eviction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But, so let's say she stayed there, right?
Yeah.
Because I think this is what Rachel is getting at. Let's say she stayed there, you even won the eviction case,
Yeah.
the judge did an order, I don't know, typically after the eviction, I think they have another period of time, it depends on the state.
Yeah.
It can be 10 days, 30 days, whatever it is. And then the cops will come after a certain period of time and then forcibly remove the person. I think what Rachel's trying to get at is
Right.
who's going to forcibly remove the person, whether man or woman, if they were, even after getting a judgment from a court, they still refuse to leave.
Right. Okay. So in this case, because she left within the 5 days, I didn't have to have like the sheriff remove her.
Right.
But I mean, at least when I was giving the papers, the cops that were there were men and women. Yes, primarily men, but there were women. I mean,
Right,
who's to say
but-
there can't be more?
Well, you're talking about a process server. So you served her with the.
So it was my mother who served her, but because of the threats she was making, we had her escorted by foot patrol.
Ah, and that was not like a bunch of strong, independent women who marched.
It was
her
a
out
man
of
and a woman.
Okay, and if it had just been a woman, do you see what I'm getting at? Do you see like who defends our national borders? Not a bunch of feminists, right? The use of force is still always going to be men.
I mean, of course,
like when you come
men
down
are
to-
taller and bigger. Of course,
Yeah.
they're gonna have
No, you
that
didn't.
physical. Well, I always got it. I always
Right.
understood.
Right.
I mean, going back to the sports things. I mean, the men are gonna be able to do things that women just physically
Right.
can't. But
So when we talk about equality, the only equality women have is the illusion of equality granted to them and provided for them by men.
sure. I mean, that's why I think it depends on the context when it comes to equality. Personally,
But if you have to appeal to men and say, men, let us be equal. We demand equality. And the men go, fine, we'll enforce equality. Is that really equality?
well, that's why I think it depends on how it is being handled. Personally, I think
So it's up to the men, basically. It's always going to when
well,
you get
because
down
they're
to it,
already
you have
in
the
that
men.
position. If we could flip it, and then they'd have to ask us, right? I mean,
Okay. So you think we could put women on all the oil rigs, and we could put women in the Senate, we could put women in the military as generals, we could make them sheriffs, and that would work out fine?
yeah.
Do you think so? Okay.
I mean, well, here's the thing. I mean, okay. For example, I remember watching this one show. I think it was called Stars and Stripes, and it took a bunch of celebrities and put them in the position of military. It had men, it had women. The person who ended up winning was the skier Peekaboo Streets, and she was a woman. She beat out actually Sarah Palin.
that guy?
She ended up beating out like Sarah Palin's husband, and
this is a reality
Wait,
show.
where's this? Where is this going?
well, for example, she ended up winning. She was in, but they were all put in position of military, and she ended up winning. It was a woman.
So do you think that men and women are the same?
I don't think they're the same. I don't. Again, I think physically there are differences.
Okay. Just physically though? Like you don't think that men have certain strengths and women have certain strengths and they each have like different divinely appointed roles in existence?
Well, I mean, I'm an atheist personally.
Okay. Okay. Do you think that they have appointed roles in society in order for society to be mostly successful?
I think that's how it's come to be.
So can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Do you think that women are happier today or do you think that they were happier before all of this stuff?
I
That's a good
think
question.
Because it's proven that women
Well-
are way less happier today.
okay, but is that just the stats we're looking at now? As in, like, those are the stats we're taking.
That's just ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, because I mean, for example, like people like to make the argument that we're seeing a rise in autism. Okay, is it the fact that there's a rise in autism, or did we just not take into account the fact that we didn't know what it was before?
Well, so
Well, I think people know
I
what
can
happiness
actually
was.
explain this because it's like my area of specialty.
Sure.
There's surveys that were done, like very large scale surveys that were done in the 70s and then again in the 90s and then again in the early 2000s. So the first one that came out was called The Paradox of Female Happiness, where when they surveyed women all over the West and asked them if they were what their satisfaction levels were, a ton of different metrics were used. In the 70s, pretty good, pretty happy, not a lot wrong. By the time we get to the 90s and they repeat the survey, women are declining in happiness in the places that they have the most freedom, the most egalitarian society. So the places where women have the most equality are the places where we see them not only reporting that they have higher levels of unhappiness, but also we see a rise in alcoholism, fetal alcohol syndrome, depression, anxiety, prescription drug use. Every metric they look at, women are reporting that they are less happy. Now, there's a lot of reasons we could talk about why that might be.
Sure.
But I think people don't understand that when women are trying to be equal, it makes life pretty impossible. You end up thinking you can have it all, do it all, be it all. Your expectations are wildly high, and you expect that you're going to be able to have a husband and a family and a career and do whatever you want, but also have a man who's going to take care of stuff. And these things all contradict each other. These things do not mesh together well. On top of that, women are more emotionally volatile. We have a hormonal cycle every month that, fluctuates. We have pre-menopause, we have postpartum, we have a lot of ups and downs that men don't have.
Why does that make us more emotional? And I'm genuinely asking.
The literal hormone
Well,
in your
hold
body.
on. I know. But, for example, let's look at, history here. So much war has been caused by men.
Well, I have something for this, actually.
Yeah.
So, they looked at monarchs, for example, kings and queens, and they actually found that queens were just as or even more likely to wage war than kings.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing. I think there's some real messed up women in history, too, truly.
No, but they did an analysis here. I'm not just saying there were some queens. They just comparing all of the. I don't know if it was the English monarchs, the British monarchs. I don't recall exactly the specific details of this analysis they did, but they did find that queens were more likely to wage war than kings.
Okay.
Just wanted to put that in there.
Sure. Are we looking at it statistically as in, let's be real, there were probably still more kings in history than there were ever queens that were really in charge.
Per capita.
Okay,
right?
so it is per capita.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't speak to that personally.
So
but
why would we think that men are going to start more war if women are more emotionally volatile and less rational and less logical on average?
Well, maybe
than
we'd
men
know
are?
that if we were taught more about those women as well. Because personally, I'm just gonna be honest with you. How many women in history can we actually name?
A ton.
Well, talking in that specific position to cause a war.
I'm an Orthodox Christian, and we have
Yeah.
tons of different queens and princesses and women who were in various leadership positions and waged horrific war on their enemies. And things like that, so.
It's just usually, we see, queens that are just with a king. Yes. Oh.
You're getting
Sorry.
Well,
cut off.
that would be. I could give you that, except that in the modern age, we have a whole bunch more data that proves that this is not the case.
Okay.
For example, when you look at juvenile correction facilities or women's prisons, so we were just talking about how men have the monopoly on force.
Yeah.
So men in male prisons, things like that. Generally, men grow up using physical force. And when they're little, they do rough and tumble play with their dad, with their siblings, with their friends, and they kind of learn where the boundaries are of how much can I beat up my friend before I go too far and actually cause harm. So they tend to learn that young, and it has an impact. Women don't have those same experiences. So what we see is that when women do have the monopoly on force, for instance, when you are a female guard in a juvenile facility or a female guard in a women's prison, the women guards are far more likely to be abusive, and the abuse tends to be worse than men. And
I have heard that.
They do think it's partially because of our emotional volatility, our hormonal fluctuations, and also just because women tend to be more likely to be on prescription psychiatric medications, have mental illnesses, and just be less used to knowing where the boundary is. So when women lose their shit and get physical, they tend to escalate to a point that's a lot
Okay.
worse than what a man
Can I
would
ask
do.
then, is some of this maybe because, also we hear a lot that women don't get the resources they need in the medical field?
You mean mental health wise?
I'm not talking necessarily mental health. For me personally, it took years to get diagnosed with a chronic illness.
Okay.
And there's a lot of that. And there's also not as much research on women in medicine. Again, going back to autism.
How does that relate to the violence?
I think I kind of know what you're talking about a little bit. I'd like to offer up a bit of a rebuttal.
Okay.
So I think you're talking perhaps about how there's less testing of certain drugs on women, or less things are tested on women. My rebuttal, though, there would be, one thing that's a concern is if you're testing an experimental drug on somebody, if the woman happens to be pregnant but she doesn't know it, there could be ramifications there when it comes, because, for example, some medications are not recommended if you're pregnant, for example. So if you're testing something experimental, the woman doesn't know she's pregnant, obviously it could be very rare that, she's happened to be partaking in a trial and, she's pregnant. That could be one of the justifications for why they're more inclined to test things on men. There's also this component of, women, when women's hormones tend to shift a bit more throughout their cycle. So I think it's better to test on someone who has their hormones are a bit
and
more level.
I get the
But the other
stability.
thing is, it's not clear to me if it's some privilege to
Yes, not have to be tested on.
have like experimental drugs
Yeah,
tested on you. That seems like it would be a negative, like a more, men are so desperate for money and resources that they're willing to have experimental drugs tested on them. I think if it was actually the reverse, if it was 100% women where we were testing drugs on them, there would be a huge outcry from feminists saying, wait, why are we like subjugating women specifically to this drug treatment? That seems like...
I get what you're saying. I mean, I personally wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay.
But
if it was 100% women?
yeah, I honestly think it's kind of necessary because
Sure, but I feel like feminists would just argue and be like, wait, hold on, this is like, look at how, this is unfair.
This
like,
isn't
why
equal.
are women
You're not
being
gonna hear that
tested
from
on?
me personally,
Okay,
but
all right, well, that's fine.
No, I mean, for example, this is a more minor thing, but like, okay, why has recently when they test like tampons or pads, it's only now they're using real menstrual blood rather than like water or
But how does
it's different.
I just wonder how this gets back to what we were debating, which was why
Well, okay,
can women defend persons and property?
Yeah, to tie back to that.
If a hurricane takes out half the eastern seaboard, are the women going to get out there and get the power lines back up and put the sandbags out and rescue people from the floodwaters and rebuild everything?
I mean, I would certainly hope so.
No, they can't. They can't do it. They can't do it.